My name is Ciso Macia, and I am an emeritus professor at Arizona State University. My main area of research is pulmonary mechanics. I am involved with the development of non-invasive testing procedures and equipment to assess the health status of the lungs. This morning, I have the special honor of introducing Dr. Stephen Barr, a theoretical physicist who has contributed to multiple fields, including particle physics, cosmology, which is a branch of astronomy focused on the origin and evolution of the universe. He is one of the proposers of the Nelson-Barr mechanism. Stephen taught at the University of Delaware for over 30 years and is also the president of the Society of Catholic Scientists.
Until my recent retirement, I spent over 40 years doing research in theoretical physics. I also am a believing Catholic, and in 2016, I helped to found an organization called the Society of Catholic Scientists, of which I'm the first president. Both my Christian faith and my interest in science began when I was very young. I was baptized as a baby and raised in the Catholic faith. My parents brought me to Christ as a child, and I've remained faithful to him, or have tried to, ever since. There was never a time in my life when I doubted the existence of God or that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Even when I was a child, I had a powerful sense that the world itself is a great mystery and a kind of a miracle. I look around and think to myself, why does all this exist? Why is there a world at all? There must be a creator. And also from childhood, it was always clear to me that Jesus Christ was more than just a man like other men. Every Sunday at Mass, I would hear the readings from the Gospels, and the figure of Christ and his words made a deep impression on my heart and mind. I had the same reaction as the centurion. Surely this man was the Son of God. My love for science and for mathematics also came early. In the second grade, I was already called the absent-minded professor by my classmates. When my brothers were out in the park playing touch football, I would usually be curled up reading books of brain teasers and math puzzles. I never had the feeling that science and faith were at odds. Quite the opposite. For me, both are rooted in a sense of wonder and a conviction that the world makes sense and that there are ultimate answers. But while I have never had any doubts about the basics, there were many details of Christian belief that puzzled me or gave me intellectual difficulty or raised questions in my mind. So I did a lot of thinking and reading over the years and the decades. And I gave a lot of thought to how the things we know by faith and how the things we know through science fit together. That eventually led me to do a lot of speaking and writing on the subject, and eventually also led me to found the Society of Catholic Scientists. Looking back, I think this is where God has been leading me all along.
I am delighted to introduce Dr. William Phillips, a physicist at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, professor of physics at the University of Maryland, and co-recipient of the 1997 Nobel Prize in Physics. Colleagues describe Bill as inquisitive by nature and, perhaps foreshadowing our upcoming conversation, famous for asking the greatest number of questions at conferences. Bill's not shy about asking questions, nor is he bashful about identifying as a Christian. For example, his Nobel Prize autobiography is salted with words like blessing and prayer. And in it, he credits his faith for helping him balance the demands of work, home, and church when he was starting out as a young professional scientist. Bill's life models the vigorous pursuit of knowledge about the universe that is firmly built on a foundation of faith in the creator of that universe.
People often ask me to talk about the relationship between my faith and my life as a scientist. I have a talk that I call Ordinary Faith, Ordinary Science. I think of myself as being an ordinary person of faith. I go to church, I go to Sunday school. I've even taught Sunday school. I change the light bulbs in the church. I sing in the choir. I'm an ordinary person of faith. And when it comes to science, I work in the lab, I get results, I write up papers, publish them in the scientific journals. My colleagues read them. They question some of the things that are there. They do their own experiments. We increase our understanding of physics that way. It's the way science works. I'm an ordinary scientist. So why is it that people think that there's some kind of fundamental conflict between science and faith? I'm reminded of when our daughter, many years ago, was just going into high school, meeting new friends, and she described talking to one of these friends. They were discussing their families, and her friend said, well, my mother is a scientist, so of course she's an atheist. And our daughter said, you couldn't walk across the fellowship hall of our church after worship without running into half a dozen physicists. Why is it that people think that there's a conflict between science and faith? Sure, there are a lot of scientists who are atheists, but I know lots and lots of scientists who are people of deep personal religious faith. I have one really good friend who is a devout atheist. He's as passionate about his atheism as I am about my science. We love art. We go to museums together. He'll explain the context of a painting in terms of European history to me. I'll explain the context of a painting in terms of biblical history to him. We have a great time. We're great friends, but we have completely different worldviews. I remember the day that the Nobel Prize was announced. I was attending a conference far from home. They decided to put together a press conference, and I stood up in front of all these members of the press and friends and colleagues, and I began by saying, I need to thank a lot of people, but I want to begin by thanking God for giving us such an amazing world in which we can explore and have fun. And that simple statement, in a sense, marked me as the religious Nobel laureate, a guy who reconciles his faith and his science, a guy who believes in God in a really personal way, a God who sustains me and comforts me and accompanies me every moment of my life.
I'm Keith Hobart. I'm the director of the Nuclear Power Generation Program at Arizona State University. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Andrew Briggs, who is an eminent material scientist. Professor Briggs is the inaugural holder of the Chair of Nanomaterials at the University of Oxford. His research interests focus on materials and techniques for quantum technologies and their incorporation into practical devices. His current investigations include vibrational states of nanotubes and charge transport through single molecules in graphene nanographs, and machine learning for measuring and tuning quantum devices. He has more than 600 publications with over 26,000 citations. Please help me welcome Dr. Briggs.
I am the professor of nanomaterials at the University of Oxford. Nanomaterials just means small stuff. So a typical experiment in the lab might be to take one molecule and connect two wires to it. You can't get much smaller stuff than one molecule. And to measure how electricity flows through the molecule, one electron at a time. Some of our experiments are at temperatures colder than anywhere in outer space. And we develop artificial intelligence for deciding what the next experiment should be and what to measure next. A few years ago, with the artist Roger Wagner, I wrote a book called The Penultimate Curiosity, in which we explain how science swims in the slipstream of ultimate questions. Because as we researched for the book, we found that where you have a culture or a community, or it could be an individual, interested in ultimate questions about truth and purpose and meaning and what is God like and how can God be known, time and again that has proved conducive to the kind of curiosity about the material world that led to what we now call science. And Roger and I even made a film about the book, which you can stream from the Penultimate Curiosity website. In my next book, It Keeps Me Seeking, I describe how two Tabors have been very influential in my life. One is David Tabor. He was my professor for my PhD. He was a devout Jew, and from him, I learned much about how to apply the highest standards of rigor, both to my science and to thinking about spiritual issues. And the other Tabor is Mount Tabor in Israel, where as a student, I did a month's course on the geography and archaeology of Israel. And during that, we spent 2 nights staying at a monastery on the top of Mount Tabor. And in the day between, I sat and looked out over the valley of Megiddo, and it came to me with a fresh force that I had to bring together in my mind what I read in the pages of the Bible and the material land in which so many of the events took place. And really, that has influenced my whole thinking about the way that science is a God-given resource for the life of faith, enabling us to respond to the mandate to engage with the created world. And at the same time, faith has much to say to science and to the technologies that arise from it in order to ensure that they really are used to make the world a better place and to promote human flourishing.
I'm Mike Mobley, professor at Grand Canyon University, and it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Sir Colin Humphreys. Professor Humphreys is a renowned physicist and materials scientist from the University of Cambridge. He was knighted by the Queen with the title Commander, Order of the British Empire, for his many contributions to science. One of his many notable publications is this book, The Miracles of Exodus, which I've referenced many times. Another favorite article is The Jewish Calendar, a Lunar Eclipse, and the Date of Christ's Crucifixion. This assembled the scientific evidence that the date of the crucifixion was Friday, the 3rd of April, 33 AD. We've linked this article on our website, ecclesia2000.org, which calls the Christian community into a celebration of the 2000th anniversary of the resurrection in 2033. Professor Humphreys, welcome.
When my younger daughter was 8 years old, my father gave her a book for her birthday called Great Men of History. And on each page, it described a famous character in history. So one page was Christopher Columbus, another was Alexander the Great, another was Julius Caesar, and another page was Jesus Christ. And in the front of the book, it had an index, and it listed all the people in the book, and it gave their dates of birth and death. And against Jesus, it said, born 4 BC, question mark, died AD 30, question mark. And my 8-year-old daughter turned to me and said, Daddy, why is it we know the dates of birth and death of all these other people, but not for Jesus? Was he a real character? And I said, well, yes, of course he was. And then later that week, it was Sunday, and I was at church, it was Easter time, and the pastor was reading from Luke's Gospel, the story of the crucifixion. And he got to the phrase where it said the sun was darkened, and then it says, for the sun was eclipsed. And I sat there in the congregation thinking, gosh, if there really was an eclipse of the sun on the evening of the crucifixion, then we can retrocalculate these using astronomy, and we can know when Jesus died. And so I started to investigate that, and the story is actually quite complicated. But in fact, it turns out there was a lunar eclipse on the evening of the crucifixion. And it also turns out that at the birth of Christ, Matthew's Gospel says there was a special star called the Star of Bethlehem. And I got involved in dating these. And so I believe Jesus was born in 4 BC, and I believe he was crucified in AD 33. But I've used science to help understand the Bible. And also what's important here is I think that God planned that Jesus would come into the world at a certain place and a certain time. And he also planned in the creation of the universe, there would be a comet at his birth and a lunar eclipse at his death. These were cosmic events. And let me just tell you a story that happened quite recently when I had a new Chinese research student. And in the morning, first day he was there. In the morning, I told him his project. In the afternoon, there was this knock on the door. He came in and stood in front of my desk. And he said, I am told you believe in God. And I said, you sound surprised. He said, it's impossible. So he was a rather forward-trained research student. And I said, why do you think it's impossible? He said, because in China, we're told if you're a scientist, you cannot believe in God. And I said, would it surprise you to know that some top scientists believe in God? And he said, I find that very hard to believe. I had him a bookshelf, a book called Real Faith, Real Science. And I said, can I lend you this book? Because every chapter is written by a famous scientist. So I lent him this book, and he came away, and he was then really open to becoming a Christian because famous scientists believed in God. And I think that's an important message. You can be a scientist and you can also be a Christian.